Welcome to Midlife Mayhem, the place where we stop blaming age, hormones, and a slow metabolism for everything, and we actually do something about it. I am Joanne Cornish, former professional bodybuilder, body composition coach, and slightly obsessed midlife science nerd. My mission here is simple: to teach you the real physiology behind fat loss, muscle, hormones, and metabolism in midlife. Without the fluff, without the gimmicks, and without talking to you like you're fragile or that you are broken, because you are neither. I'll give you the exact science and strategy so that you can become the outlier, the one who looks and feels better at 50, 60 and beyond than you did in your 30s, while everyone else is calling it normal aging. And if you're listening and thinking, okay, that's great, but I don't want to just understand this, I want a plan, I want a coach in my corner, well, that is exactly what I do. I run online coaching programs, live classes, and I have an elite 10-month program starting in February. Simply go to joannelee.com or click the link in every show note. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to Midlife Mayhem, and today we're going to talk about PCOS in midlife, so polycystic ovarian syndrome in midlife. Now, when it comes to polycystic ovarian syndrome, I think that's about 13% of ladies, and it can really be problematic, usually discussed when ladies are in their 20s, problematic when they're in the 20s and 30s because can have fertility issues. But then the conversation seems to stop. It's almost like, PCOS goes away in your 40s and 50s, and that is simply not the case. So let's talk about PCOS with regards to midlife. So again, it's discussed mostly with ladies in their 20s and early 30s because of, the symptoms which show up early, things like irregular cycles, infertility, acne, excess androgens, and that very frustrating weight gain, especially around the midsection, that weight gain that just will not budge. But it's not like it magically disappears with age. The symptoms, they change, they shift, but the underlying physiology is still there. In fact, in midlife, it forms to kind of like a perfect storm for women who have PCOS, because the hormonal landscape of peri and postmenopause, it just collides with the metabolic profile of PCOS in ways that will amplify weight gain, insulin resistance, inflammation. And now we're talking about long-term health risks. So now the conversation moves away from fertility and it actually moves towards long-term health risks. So let's start at the beginning and let's talk about what PCOS actually is. So doctors traditionally diagnose PCOS through the reproductive system. So irregular ovulation, infertility, ovarian cyst. So the narrative becomes PCOS is a reproductive disorder. However, PCOS is fundamentally a metabolic and hormonal condition because PCOS is driven by insulin resistance. It's driven by androgen dominance. So that can be the thinning hair, the acne. It's driven by chronic low-grade inflammation, which becomes very problematic as we get older. It is driven by altered cortisol signaling. That's the mid-weight, the mid-body fat accumulation. But also as we get older, that altered cortisol is going to rip through muscle. Also poor glucose tolerance and impaired metabolic flexibility. Now, the poor glucose tolerance, so not clearing the glucose out of the blood, is problematic. And this impaired metabolic flexibility, metabolic flexibility gets worse as we age anyway. And I've touched on it a little bit in a few recent podcasts. But basically what we're talking about here is a cell being able to be flexible in terms of going between fuel types. So is there glucose available to the fuel, to the cell to be used as fuel? Is there fat to be used as fuel and the cell being able to go between different fuel types. Well, metabolic inflexibility is where it's not really good at switching. And when you get a cell that's kind of locked in on just being a glucose burner, then, well, it's not burning fat for a start, so the weight loss is a problem. But also that when you're kind of just the glucose burner, then that is the person that's snacking all day. They're having that sugar conversation. They've always got that noise in their head, that sweet tooth that always exists. These are, root issues linked to PCOS, and they don't just vanish just because fertility is no longer a concern, but the discussion with health professionals can indeed disappear. So yes, PCOS absolutely persists into midlife. Why then are we under this idea that somehow PCOS disappears, or at the very least it improves after the age of 40? So you might get a lady that was very frustrated in her 20s and 30s with PCOS, dealing with the weight gain, and maybe they figured it out. And then sometimes the symptoms may seem to have appeased, have got somewhat better. And then they get into the 40s and 50s, and they're maybe struggling with their weight again, they're struggling with sugar cravings again, and they forget to, join the dots again. They forget, like, oh, this is still PCOS. So why do things seemingly improve? Well, what's happening here is, that their cycles become more regular. Their acne improves because, testosterone is naturally declining with age. And they're under this impression that PCOS is calming down. Estrogen's declining with age, progesterone is declining with age. Like I said, androgens are declining with age. But the insulin resistance has not gone away. The visceral fat has not gone away. The genetic predisposition has not gone away. So the surface symptoms of maybe irregular cycles, the acne, things like that, maybe even the thinning hair, might have got better. But the metabolic engine underneath is still running quite viciously. So what about the midlife physiology plus the PCOS physiology? When we put the changes of midlife and couple them with the physiology of PCOS, so this is where it kind of gets kind of interesting. This is not the teenager experience of PCOS. This is not the infertility experience of PCOS. So think about what women are dealing with anyway entering their 40s and 50s. So just any woman going through their 40s and 50s is dealing with rising insulin resistance. They're dealing with loss of lean mass, loss of muscle. They're dealing with higher baseline inflammation, slower recovery, altered cortisol, declining estrogen, declining progesterone. So get that lady and add PCOS on top of this, and the challenges are very, very real. So let's start with the symptom that's so obvious, the increased midsection fat storage. So PCOS already pushes fat towards the abdomen because insulin resistance and androgen levels favor visceral fat. Well, in midlife, estrogen declines, and because of that, visceral fat increases. Now, if you ever do one of my coaching calls, I can explain why that is. There's an enzyme called LPL, lipoprotein lipase, but estrogen declined, visceral fat increases. So now you've got both mechanisms working at once. You've already got PCOS that's pushed towards fat in the abdomen because of the insulin resistance, which is increasing with age, and those androgen levels. But now you also have declining estrogen, which is pushing more fat into that visceral area. So this is why some women with a history of PCOS feel like they suddenly balloon around the middle in their 40s and 50s. And now they're blaming it on age, and age has a part to play, a role to play, but it's largely because of that underlying condition of PCOS. PCOS women will show an exaggerated cortisol response and like I said, lower metabolic flexibility. So this is going to bring with it, anabolic resistance. So this is going to cause muscle loss. Muscle loss is going to accelerate and fat loss is going to slow down. So the cortisol is a huge issue. Cortisol will rip through muscle. And PCOS ladies have an exaggerated cortisol response anyway. And then the cortisol response is increasing with age, you know, plus that loss of metabolic flexibility. So they're just not burning fat as well. And this is why for some ladies they're getting on the GLP-1 medications, well, not just the GL but the weight loss medications, and this feels like magic for many PCOS ladies, and they're not wrong. But what they do have to be very, very, very concerned with is they are going to be even more prone to muscle loss. So, I mean, anybody take these medications has to really prioritize protein intake and resistance training. But a PCOS lady has to be uber focused in this area because, their exaggerated cortisol response. What else is, but it can feel like magic for those ladies. Power to them. What else? Mood issues intensify. So you've got insulin resistance, you've got fluctuating estrogen, you've got dysregulated cortisol. That's going to show up as anxiety, irritability, brain fog, and fatigue, which might be slightly worse for PCOS ladies because of that cortisol. What about long-term health risks? So PCOS ladies already have a higher lifetime risk of type 2 diabetes, dyslipidemia, hypertension, sleep apnea. What's the other one? Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Menopause dramatically increases all of these. So PCOS ladies already have a higher risk profile, and menopause increases all of them. So if anything, midlife is a time when PCOS needs more attention and not less. Now, as we get into premenopause, menopause, a lot of symptoms show up that most people are not prepared for, and that's my message for 2026. That ladies are just not prepared for premenopause and menopause. So, what are some of the symptoms that ladies are dealing with that are actually PCOS in disguise? So, the sudden midsection weight gain. So, yes. People say they gain weight in the midsection with midlife. I didn't. You don't have to. You don't have to. I can explain all that in my coaching. But PCOS ladies plus menopausal estrogen decline, and yes, a sudden midsection weight gain can present itself. Intense carb cravings in the evening. That is often insulin driven, but it's worsened by poor glucose disposal. The feeling of being puffy or inflamed, which is most certainly part of a PCOS profile, and that is that chronic low-grade inflammation. Well, inflammation is such a large part of aging that they actually gave it a name, inflammaging. I mean, inflammaging, it's literally because aging is so linked to inflammation, and the PCOS profile is already one of chronic low-grade inflammation. Hair thinning, that androgen sensitivity, that doesn't magically go away with age. Worsening blood work, the triglycerides, the fasting glucose. These all will may show up of an issue in ladies with PCOS in midlife. What are the biggest mistakes I see with women? Well, the biggest one is they've forgotten about PCOS. They forgot they even have it. They thought, oh, well, that was when I was in my 20s and 30s. Now I've got my kids, so I haven't got it. Yeah, you still got it. That PCOS physiology is still there, setting a metabolic stage. And this is why things like calorie cutting just won't work. Just doing more cardio won't work. They start to feel broken because, maybe, doing all this deficit and doing all this exercise, so they feel like they're broken. And if they remember themselves, that's how they felt when they were younger. They were because it didn't work then, and it really doesn't work that much now. The feeling of doing all the right things and not getting the results. They're getting that midsection fat even when they're eating clean. Their glucose levels are spiking. They're checking these things, and they feel broken because it shouldn't be happening because I'm doing all the right things. Um, So they're very aware of their dysregulated insulin response, the high insulin state. They're probably aware of that high insulin state that's caused a lot of the symptoms. So they go gung ho. So they're going to go, I'm going to go, they're not just going to go low carb. They'll go, I'm going full on keto. And, some of these really restrictive, stressful diets in midlife don't work so well. And I'll even go with the extended fasting on that because of the cortisol state. So cortisol it can be elevated in midlife, and anything that makes that situation work is not going to be the ideal protocol to follow. Um, The muscle preservation. Oh my gosh, this is such a big deal. This is such a big deal. This is so cornerstone for PCOS midlifers. So without muscle preservation, that insulin resistance is going to get so much worse. Ladies with PCOS, resistance training is your absolute best friend, and it's not just your best friend, but it's gosh, what is the word I'm looking for? But this is a non-negotiable. Without muscle, that insulin resistance is going to get so much worse for anybody. But if you've already got predisposed to it by PCOS, then everything that goes along with insulin resistance, for one, diabetes, but just that body fat increase, which is going to show up pretty quick. So no, menopause does not cure PCOS. I did see that term somewhere, which kind of prompted me to do this do this podcast. So yes, you're no longer seeing the ovulatory problems, you're not seeing the fertility problems, you're not seeing the cycle irregularity. But what you can be seeing and you should be watching out for is a worsened insulin profile, abdominal fat gain, greater cardiovascular risk, persistent androgen sensitivity, the inflammation markers in your blood work, please check. You should be also looking out for thyroid interactions and worsening metabolic flexibility. So the signs of the worsening metabolic flexibility is the ways you usually burn fat, it's not working anymore. Your body's not very good at burning fat. And just a quick plug, but that is my product, the SLUPP332. That is what it does. It attaches to the receptor, telling the cell to burn fat for fuel. So it's an incredibly great supplement for anybody in midlife, but gosh, especially with PCOS. Plug over, but link in the show notes. But also good news. Women with PCOS respond extremely well to strength training. Remember, you've got those androgens. They respond very well to high protein intake. So androgens and protein are growth factors. So at last, those androgens can actually work for you. You can bring that inflammation down. The GLP-1 medications are insulin sensitizers, so I am a fan. Also, any sort of gut repair protocol would really help the ladies in midlife with PCOS. PCOS has a huge, huge, huge gut hormone component. So any type of gut repair protocols, and if we're going to talk about peptides there, the use of BPC 157, which body protective compound, is especially good for gut repair. So if I had PCOS, I would be definitely using BPC 157. And the smart supplementation that worked for these ladies when they were younger, the inositol, the chromium, the berberine, the magnesium glycinate, They worked before, they don't stop taking them. They're still part of your PCOS protocol. And also, and I love the fact that, HRT is so much in the news recently, but the use of HRT, hormone replacement therapy, because estrogen alone will dramatically improve glucose control. And that's a big deal. So HRT is absolutely a conversation I would encourage ladies with PCOS to have as they're in their early 40s. I would start talking about it, let alone in their 50s. So midlife actually gives you the hormonal clarity to actually, start over in a way. A lot of PCOS ladies, they figured this out in their 30s, in their 20s and 30s, and then they've kind of forgotten about it. You have the strategy, go back to what worked before, it will work again, but just with some extra tools of that strength training, that, really, really prioritizing the protein, watching out for the inflammation. Honestly, the use of the appropriate use of the weight loss medications, because it will crush the insulin, which you have been fighting your whole life. Also, PCOS ladies, that gut health is very important to you. There is no room for the processed food. There is no room for the toxins, and there isn't for anybody, but you really don't have that luxury. So any gut repair protocol, and like I say, for me, I would be all over the BPC 157. People are using it for tissue repair, but originally that's what it was used for: gut repair, IBS, IBD. And being very open to the conversation with HRT, hormone replacement therapy. I'm a fan of it anyway. I'm glad the FDA has changed its tune on it. Maybe that will open it up to having an accurate conversation with health professionals. But if you are talking to your health professional, and if it is somebody new to you that you didn't work with in your 20s and 30s, please tell them about your history with PCOS. You already know that there isn't really a blood test. There isn't really a one test that you get a label put in your medical report. It is understanding your blood work and identifying it. So if you are working with a new health professional, make sure you bring it up and tell them your history of PCOS, because it has not gone away. I hope that was helpful. It was at least helpful for 13% of the ladies out there. But yeah, PCOS in midlife. So the supplement I mentioned, the supplement that I have is the SLU-PP332. You can go to my YouTube channel and see a lot of videos on it, Joanne Lee Cornish. You can also go to the website, which is just SLU332.com. But as always, do your own research. Thanks for listening to Midlife Mayhem. And remember, midlife isn't something to be scared of, but it is something to be respected. It's not the decline that everybody expects. It's the opportunity to take full control. And it's actually the final and last real opportunity that we have to become an outlier in midlife and beyond. If you're ready to do that with me, join one of my live coaching programs, do one of my self-study programs, or apply for the 10-month elite program, which starts in February. Head over to joannelee.com or email me directly at joanne@joannelee.com. Thanks so much for joining me today.